Hello guys, David Vos here. Oh wow, it's so beautiful out today here in Alabama. Beautiful sunshine and the leaves are coming out and the blossoms and everything. Hope you're having a wonderful day where you are. Well guys, today is going to be very important. I believe it is going to be one of the most important videos that we've done in a while. Because I think a lot of us have some questions. Some of us have questions. Even those of us who don't know we have these questions may have these questions. Because a lot of times as Christians, we believe things. We were taught these things. We don't know of any other way to understand them. And we just kind of, file them away in our little library in our mind. And we believe them, but we may not completely understand them. Or we may not completely know why or have any absolute proof. But we don't really know what else to do. And it fits kind of, well. And this is what we believe. Because we just really don't know what else to believe. And I think for a lot of Christians, it would seem unthinkable that Jesus wasn't true and that he's not coming again. And like, how in the world would we put the world together in any kind of cohesive way if we didn't believe in Jesus? Why, it looks like the world's coming to an end right now. And without Jesus, we're lost. And we are most of all of men to be pitied, as the Apostle Paul says, if only in this life we have hoped in him. So, but what I want to share with you today is something that I don't think you'll find anywhere else in anybody's books. We keep talking about Hal Lindsey or Ellen White or Schoenfield or whoever one of these scholars have written about these things. No one's ever really understood what I'm about to share with you. There have been some attempts to understand this by Charles Russell and Jehovah's Witnesses, but they kept changing their view over and over, and they didn't know what they were, somewhere along they made a mistake and they couldn't figure out where. Ellen White, the Seventh-day Adventists have some views on this. I would say it's, they're hitting somewhere near the mark on some of this a little bit. I mean, at least you don't hear very many people talking about the Gentile Times, but you hear Jehovah's Witnesses and Adventists talking about this. So what is the Gentile Times? I don't think most Christians realize how important this phrase is. I want to show you in Luke chapter 21, verse 24. And let's go down to King James Bible. It says, "And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all the nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled." I think it's important that we get that in context here. So let's go to New King James Version. And let's start with verse 20. Jesus says, and this is in red, because these are the words of Jesus. "But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies." Now let's get this in perspective. Jesus was alive, obviously, on earth when this was being spoken. These are his words. This is probably about 40 years before the destruction of Jerusalem. This is right just before Jesus actually was crucified. And Jesus was standing there talking to his disciples, and they came up to him and asked him, "When will these things be? The sign of thy coming and of the end of the world," or the age, the end of the age. So this is a big question here. And we've all read Matthew 24 and Luke 21. Some of it, most of it. And Jesus describes some things that are going to happen before the entire overthrow of the world. That appears to be what he's saying. The end of the world, the coming of the Lord. So it appears that when the Lord comes, it is the entire complete end of this present world, wicked world. Not just, because there's those who will point out that there are various words in the New Testament that we have to be very careful about. For instance, where the gospel will be preached in all the inhabited world, that word in Greek is inhabited earth. It will be preached in all the inhabited world. So it doesn't necessarily mean the entire world. And so we have to take note of very specific words. But I guess I could do a whole video on whether or not Jesus was talking about the full and complete end of this present material world and the establishing of his kingdom, which, remember, Jesus said, my kingdom is no part of this world. And so hopefully we all on the same page here, and we understand that what they were asking is not just when will be the end of Jerusalem, but also of thy coming. Well, let's go to Matthew 24 first, get that in context. I'm going to spend a minute here on this point before we get to the next. We got some very important things to go over. But let's just start from verse 1 of chapter 24 of Matthew. Then Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came up to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said to them, do you not see all these things? Assuredly, I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down. And verse 3, now as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? That does not mean the end of the world. It doesn't mean the end of the globe or the whole earth, or even, it doesn't mean the end of the cosmos, if such a thing were to be possible. But it means the end of the age. And verse 4, and Jesus answered and said unto them, take heed that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass. But the end is not yet. The end of what? The end of the age. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places, and all these are the beginnings of sorrow. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation. They will kill you. You will be hated of all nations for my name's sake. And then many will be offended, will betray one another, will hate one another, then many false prophets will arise and deceive many. Because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold, but he who endures unto the end of what? The end of the age, shall be saved. How are we saved? From the delivered, as we've talked about that word many times. It means to be rescued or delivered. And then several places it literally adds from the wrath. We're delivered from the wrath to come. And then it says the gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to the nations, and then the end will come. Well, that word is not the world, but the inhabited earth. And the inhabited earth in the days of Jesus was the area around the Middle East. Or, even if one understood it to mean, America, the whole world, it's being more specific than the whole world or the globe. It's saying that the inhabitants of that present system. Verse 15, therefore when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in a holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. Jesus takes us back then to Daniel the prophet, and that's where we come in here. We got to go back to Daniel to find out what Jesus is about to explain in a literal way. Jesus explains some very literal things. But let's go down to, because he says, woe to the pregnant woman and all of this. And then in verse 22, unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved. Now, he doesn't say no flesh on earth, does he? He says no flesh will be saved, but he's talking in the context of Jerusalem, because this is Jerusalem. See what it says? Not one stone will be left upon a stone in Jerusalem. So then if anyone says, look, here is the Christ, there, do not believe it. False Christs and false prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I've told you beforehand. They say, hey, he's in the desert, don't go out. He's in the inner room, don't believe it. As lightning comes out of the east and flashes into the west. Now, I believe that's mistranslated. It's not lightning. The word is the light. And I believe it's the sunlight, because lightning doesn't come in the east always and shine to the west always. Lightning may shine all over the world, but it doesn't always come in the east, right? But the sun comes up in the east. So the sun shines all the way unto the west. So will the coming of the Son of Man be. For wherever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened. I mean, maybe to imply that there are other tribulations, but in the tribulation of those days, it says the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the heaven. When? At the end of that age, when Jerusalem is surrounded by armies and destroyed, and not one stone is left upon a stone. And they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And we've done videos about how this coming on the clouds has to do with the storm clouds in the times of trouble. It's in Joel chapter 2 and various other verses in the Old Testament. But there's quite a few different verses in the Old Testament that talks about the coming clouds. And two of them that talks about these clouds of trouble and the storm and the end of the age specifically mention stuff that Jesus is talking about. He quotes from them. And he will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet. This is how it ties in the book of Revelation. We know that the book of Revelation is talking about this too. So whatever Jesus is talking about, whatever time frame he's talking about, the book of Revelation is also talking about it. Because everything that Jesus mentions is mentioned by John in Revelation. The trumpets and everything. And they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Now learn a parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender, puts forth leaves, you know that the summer is near. So also when you see these things, know that it is near at the doors. Assuredly, I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all things take place. As we have shown in a prior, and I don't want to go into going back to prove that again because we don't have a lot of time. I've got to cover a lot of area today. But that word generation means race or family. It does not mean a generation or an age of people that's living that will never die. It's talking about a race of people that are living and will never die. So it's not talking about a specific time or period of time, but specifically like 70 years or something. Then it says, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. Heaven and earth. Did heaven and earth pass away when Jerusalem was destroyed? Well, one could understand it symbolically so. Because the heavens, Revelation talks about the heavens being rolled up like a scroll. And the stars falling. Well, didn't that sound like the heavens and the earth perishing? If the stars are falling and the sun is not going to give its light and the moon is going to turn into blood. The great and fear-inspiring day of the Lord. This sounds like the end of something big. The end of an age, but what is the end of the age? The end of the age is the harvest of the world, of mankind. Are we sure it's only about the end of the Jewish age? And then is there another age coming after that? And does the Bible then describe or explain what this other new age that's coming afterwards would be like? Yeah. It tells us that it will be Jesus' kingdom. And it will be established in book of Revelation. It says that his 12 apostles will sit on 12 thrones, and they'll rule, well, the 144,000 specifically too. It says they'll all sit upon thrones, the saints, and they'll rule over the earth. And all of the dead shall come out of hell, and they'll all be judged. This is more than just the destruction of Jerusalem, obviously. I mean, it may be, now some may say, well, it has to all be over then at the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Except that, I mean, one could interpret it that way up to now, right? Except now we're to a point where we're realizing that the heavens and the earth will pass away. And we begin to realize that we've been putting something into the text that never was there. We've practically read all of Matthew 24 on this subject, and we've not seen anywhere in there yet, and it's not there, that there would only be one generation, like 70 years, and then it would all happen. It didn't say that. They asked him, when will it be? Kind of two questions, like a two-part question. When will Jerusalem be destroyed? Has Jerusalem been destroyed? No, it's still there. Not one stone upon a stone? Nope, there's still stones. Remember, there's a wailing wall over there right now. They're all banging their head up against it right now. Well, I said we wouldn't go into this because we didn't have time, but we've got to cover this. Because Matthew chapter 24, verse 34 says, this generation will by no means pass away. Ex-Jehovah's Witnesses know this scripture very, very well. They claim that means 70 years or 80 or something like this. Well, let's look at verse 34 in the interlinear. We've done this before, but I want to show you what this word generation is. Gene. Gene is not lifespan. And the definition is race, family. Yes, generation, but not in the sense of a lifespan, in the sense of a race or a family. Friends, that race of people of Jerusalem is still here. I know it almost left, but it's still here. And there's a reason why it almost went away. Because that's what we're going to talk about in this video, the times of the Gentiles. And it says, Jerusalem shall be trampled by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. We need to know how. Now, this is the only place in the Bible that tells us when this is all going to happen. There's a specific time for the Gentiles to trample the city. But that race will not pass away until. Oh, they will pass away, but not until. Now, let's go further. Yes, a great destruction occurred. People died. But Jesus said there would be a tribulation that had never, ever occurred before or never will again will be so terrible. This goes back to this thing in Daniel that we're going to cover that describes the end of the entire cosmos, or the cosmetic, literal, material world, and the setting up of the kingdom of Christ, wherein dwelleth righteousness, and the saints shall shine like the stars of heaven, like, in their brightness, and they'll bring the many, the great multitude to righteousness. None of this has happened. And if you get to looking at Matthew 24, he doesn't say that it's all going to happen in that one generation. If if that's what he meant, then why didn't Jesus just say, oh, well, here, because they asked him, when will the end of the world come, right? That's what they're asking. And he could have just said, oh, well, in about 40 years, you guys will still be alive, and just wait for it. It's coming soon. We think that's what it says, but it doesn't ever say that. It doesn't say soon. It says swiftly. It's a different word. And it uses some other words like the end of the age, not the end of the world, and stuff. So we get confused, but we're going to cover all of this. Now, again, that could be symbolic, but even if it's symbolic, it does not refer to a symbolic overthrow of the present world. Okay? I mean, it may not be referring to the overthrow of the present stars. The stars will be extinguished. It may not mean that the earth will be literally burned up, but Peter says it will be burned up. The elements being intensely hot. So maybe that's symbolic. But one thing for sure, we're waiting for a new heavens and a new earth wherein dwelleth righteousness. And for those who believe that Jesus fulfilled this in 70 AD, we don't have any clear evidence that Jesus returned in 70 specifically. Now, some say, well, there's a story somewhere in secular history where some people went out in the desert and they thought they saw Jesus. Well, it's not in the Bible. You'd think that somewhere the apostles, like John was alive at that time, you'd think he would have said, hey, I'm alive. It's 100 AD and I saw it. Jesus is here. No, in 100 AD, John is still talking about this future. So what's going on here? He's talking about this in the future, the Apostle John. And he says that there will be this Antichrist, and a third of the world will be burned up, and then all the world's burned up. The trees, the mountains fall. They're saying to the mountains, fall on us and hide us from the presence of the Lord, who's coming in his brightness. And he gets rid of the false prophet and the dragon and the beast. The lamb beast that looked like a lamb, spoke like a dragon. And, all the souls of those under the altar that die in the great multitude, which no man could number. It can't be just a few million. It's got to be all the world. Standing in heaven with white robes, and the 144,000 standing on Mount Zion, and they rule over the earth for 1,000 years and reign with Christ. There is no way, and we could go on with various scriptures and explanations. And then you've got the Apostle Paul, who says, now, as far as the gathering together unto him, because he's always talking about we're going to go with Jesus. He's coming to receive us unto himself. And he says about that, don't be quickly shaken in mind or in spirit, as though if you receive a letter as though from us, saying that it's already here, that you missed it, right? The saints went to heaven and you missed it. It's already taken place, the resurrection. Paul says it will not happen, the gathering together unto him, and the end of this world, and the new heavens and the new earth, and all this kingdom of righteousness and his kingdom being established. None of that will happen, Paul says. Don't be quickly shaken in mind or in spirit. Even if somebody said, oh yeah, in 70 somebody said that Jesus returned, and there was a little group of people in the desert and they saw Jesus and they went out. Well, Jesus said, don't believe him. He's in the desert. Don't believe him. Because when Jesus comes, every eye will see him from one end of the world to the other. Right? Every eye, like the sun coming up from the east, shines all the way into the west. So shall the coming of the Son of Man be. John in 100 AD, and you might say, well, maybe it wasn't really 100. Well, it had to have been after 70. Every testimony says that John was a very old man. And John sees these bowls of wrath and all of mankind having to make a choice whether or not to get the mark of the beast. Those who did worship the beast, and those who didn't, they were beheaded for the witness that they had given. And then you see Jesus coming on the clouds of heaven, and with power and great glory, and he sets up his kingdom, and the saints began to rule. And there was a kingdom of righteousness. All right, so let's go back to Daniel chapter 9. Now we're going to cover a little bit of chapter 2, chapter 4, chapter 7, chapter 9, and chapter 11. The reason why is because Daniel is a cohesive book, and Daniel has one theme and one theme only, and that is the time between a certain event called the going forth of the call to restore and to rebuild Jerusalem until everything is finished. The entire end. And the righteous bring the many to righteousness. The ones who shine like the stars of heaven. And the Lord's kingdom and the Ancient of Days comes, and Jesus, or the Son of Man, gains access to the Ancient of Days. And he sits upon his throne and rules the world and blah, blah, blah. Everything's over. So Daniel then describes why the kingdom hasn't come yet and why it won't come and when it will and why and all of this. So I just want to show you here, Daniel chapter 9. Starts off by, Darius the son of Ahasuerus. This is the man that made the call, and all secular historians have a date. Now, it doesn't matter if some have 1 year or two different, because we're not going to get the exact date. The Bible doesn't tell us any exact. It says we don't know the day and the hour. It does tell us we know the times and the seasons. How would we know that? Because Daniel tells us the times and the seasons. But it doesn't tell us the exact date because we don't know it in history. He tells us how long it'll be, but he doesn't tell us from the exact date, month, day, year, exactly. He just says from the time that the call goes forth to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. And secular historians, it tells us in the book of Daniel that it's Ahasuerus. And we know that was about 550 BC. Okay? And then there would be a period of time. Now, if you go down to, because we're not going to be able to read the entire book of Daniel, so we're going to have to kind of skim over some of this. But in verse 20, it says, and while I was speaking and praying, confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my supplication before the Lord my deity, for the holy mountain of my El. Whilst I was speaking in prayer, even the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision at the beginning. Take note of that. At the beginning. So there's a beginning to all of this. And Daniel, at this point, doesn't understand. But he'd already been given instructions from Gabriel in a vision at the beginning. Because all of the visions from Daniel 2, Daniel 4, Daniel 7, Daniel 9, Daniel 11, and Daniel 8 as well. All of those, there are several different parts to the vision where he focuses in on one part or another. But every one of these visions is speaking of the exact same vision. But here where it says that Gabriel, he had seen in a vision at the beginning, is talking about the chapter prior, which is Daniel chapter 8. And we'll show you that. And it says, being caused to fly swiftly, touched me about the time of the evening oblation. And he informed me, and he talked with me, and he said unto me, O Daniel, I am now come forth to give thee skill and understanding. Up to this point, he had no understanding. And later on, it says to Daniel, seal up the book. It will not be revealed. It'll be sealed until the time of the end. Nobody's ever going to understand this. This is why Jesus says, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, let the reader use discernment. You've got to have this wisdom. Well, then that's why the book of Revelation says, let the man who hath wisdom count the number. Because that's the man who's Daniel, who hath wisdom. So, this is verse 23. At the beginning of thy supplications, the commandment came forth. We can find in the chapter preceding this one, in chapter 8, we'll see that the commandment came forth to Gabriel to tell Daniel the meaning of the vision. But he never got to because he fell sick many days. We'll see that here in a minute. And I am come to show thee, for thou art greatly beloved. Therefore understand the matter and consider the vision. Verse 24. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people. Now, 70 weeks of years. We can prove that it's years because it actually extends down to Jesus Christ and him coming. Remember, this starts in 450 somewhere around there. We're not going to get exact. Many say 457 or something like that. And it's going to go 490 years or 70 weeks of years. So there has been the 70 weeks of years determined upon thy people, upon thy holy city, which is Jerusalem. Isn't that what Jesus is talking about? When he says, wrath upon this people, and Jerusalem shall be trampled on by the nations, the Gentiles, until the times be fulfilled. And to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity and to bring in everlasting righteousness. Well, the reconciliation of iniquity was when Jesus died on the cross. So Jesus died on the cross about 490 years after the call that went forth to restore and rebuild Jerusalem in about 457 or something, 455. We don't know the exact date. So that means that around 30 AD, somewhere, give or take a few years, Jesus came and died on a cross. But there remained one last 3.5 year period. The people, they talk about it as the last half of Daniel's 70th week. So he says, to bring in everlasting righteousness. Well, Jesus did that. To seal up the vision. What vision? We were just talking about it. The beginning of the vision, which was when Daniel first got the vision, that actually happened in Daniel chapter 4 and chapter 7. He got these visions. And in the chapter 11, it says, seal it up until the time of the end. Well, when is the time of the end? See? So when Jesus came, that wasn't the end. Because that just sealed up the vision and prophecy. Because remember, after Christ, the apostles all died. Doesn't seem like there were any prophets after that. You know, not that there can't be, or that in the latter days there won't be. But the prophet or the prophecy was sealed. And the vision was sealed. And now we're all waiting for that. And that's why Jesus refers back to Daniel. That's why John refers back to the man who hath wisdom, who is Daniel. And to anoint the most holy, well, that happened. Jesus inhabited, tabernacled in the body, and we're all part of the body of Christ. And he was anointed. So the temple, the sanctuary was anointed when Jesus was anointed, and the apostles were anointed with the Holy Spirit. And it says, know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to rebuild Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks, and 62 weeks, and the street shall be built again in the wall, and the trouble of times. And listen, everybody knows, nobody disagrees. I think even the Judeans, many of the rabbis have said this all was fulfilled at the time of Jesus. It's just they don't want to believe Jesus was the Messiah, so they don't know what to do. But up until Jesus came, this is what they were expecting. And so, from the going forth of the commandment to restore and rebuild Jerusalem under the Messiah, the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62. The street shall be built again, the wall, even in troublesome times. Okay, so Herod's temple was built, and it was built during troublesome times. And it says, after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And the people and the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Well, that happened in 70. But if this prophecy is to be understood as consecutive, then it wouldn't work. Because when Jesus came and died, there was another 40 years before the temple was destroyed. And it wasn't fully and completely destroyed, because we still got parts of it over there today. But then it says, and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood. But now, note very, very carefully the next line. The end thereof shall be with a flood, or a flood of troops, of armies. Jesus talks about that. And unto the end of the war, desolations are determined. And he shall confirm the covenant with the many for 1 week. In the midst of the week he shall cause sacrifice and oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of the abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation. And that which is determined shall be poured out upon the desolate. Okay, so something's going to continue to be poured out after the destruction of Jerusalem. Because as we've already read, Jerusalem, they'll be led captive into all the nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled on by the nations until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. What is the times of the Gentiles? Well, let's go back to the beginning of the vision. Because the 70 weeks are determined upon thy people, and thy holy city are cut off for thy people. Cut off from what? From an entire period of time where the Gentiles receive a period of time to reign. Jerusalem don't get to reign for a period of time. The Gentiles do. And Daniel describes it as a series of beasts. These are the Gentile times. These beasts, these carnivores, they go and they trample. The Gentile beast system tramples the holy city. And it all starts in 455, somewhere around there. And 490 years is cut off for thy people to bring in an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness. And for Christ to be cut off and to be crucified. And then Jerusalem to be destroyed, and then it to lie desolate and to be trampled on until. So, let's go back. Here's Daniel 2. This is where it starts. I mean, Daniel 1 doesn't mention any of these dreams or this vision. So we start off with Daniel 2. And this is where Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams, and his spirit was troubled. And he asked all the sorcerers of the Chaldeans to interpret. They couldn't do it. And to make this really clear is difficult, because if I choose to just, in order to get all the fine points and all the particulars in, I'd almost have to read Daniel chapter 1 through chapter 12. And that would take us too long. I'm going to just skip over and basically narrate a lot of what you can go and read the book of Daniel yourself. But I want to show you point out a few things that are important to read and to notice while you're reading. The second chapter of Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream about this great statue. That is completely in harmony with all the other visions. And Daniel then himself has visions. But every one of these visions, from Daniel 2, Daniel 4, Daniel 7, Daniel 8, 9, and 11, all of them have to do with the Gentile times, or the kings of the Gentiles ruling over Jerusalem. So the first one in Daniel 2 is about the statue, and at the end it's broken. And it describes it not as a beast, but as this metallic statue, it starts off at top gold, then the breastplate of silver, the arms and breastplate, and then the waist of brass, and then the legs of iron, and then at the very bottom there's 10 toes. Well, in the other prophecies that Daniel has, he sees them as beasts, and he sees the 10 horns, which corresponds to the 10 toes. But in every one of these, at the end, when the 10 horns arise, then this is destroyed, and you see the Lord's kingdom being established. So there's this whole vision. Now, this would be called what Jesus describes as the Gentile times, or the times that the sprout or Christ's kingdom has not yet arrived. When this tree in Daniel 4 is banded, and it says, 7 times shall pass over thee, before you know who reigns in the kingdom of men. So there will be 7 times where this beast-like kingdoms will reign. And he goes through and he sees all kinds of specific events, from the King Babylon all the way down to the time of the end and the 10 horns. And he describes it as a time of 7 times. So what we're going to find is in Daniel 9, where it talks about the 70 weeks that are determined upon thy people, cut off. See, it says determined in some translations, but it literally means to be cut off from, or cut off from something. And the only thing that Daniel ever mentioned is the entire period of time that the Gentiles reign. All that time they're going to trample Jerusalem. Not from 70, but at different intervals and at different times. Once from 70, they'll continue that which is desolate, which is lying desolate, he says, will continue desolate. And the Gentiles will trample the holy city until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. It's very clear. If you read Daniel 2, Daniel 4, Daniel 7, Daniel 9, or Daniel 8 too. Keep forgetting Daniel 8. It's very important. Daniel 9, Daniel 11, and Daniel 12. Gives you the details of this particular composite vision of these beasts or these Gentiles that reign. And the only place it ever tells us how long is the 7 times. And that's told to us in Daniel chapter 4. But the mistake that people have is when they're understanding this, they're trying to take these 1,260 days, some of them, and make that a day for a year. But we can't do that because those 1,260 days are the last half of Daniel's 70th week. It's a literal 3.5 years. And they've already been turned into a day for a year because that's the whole 70 weeks, which are weeks of years. And so the last 3.5 years has already been turned into day for a year. And that last 3.5 years is something that we're looking forward to. Revelation, John 100 AD is still looking forward to this last 3.5 years. The question is, when do those last 3.5 years roll? When does this great tribulation come? This is what Jesus was asked in Matthew 24. And he says, well, go back to Daniel. So we look at Daniel 2, we see it as a statute and the 10 toes and all of that, and then Christ's kingdom is established. We look at Daniel 4, we see beasts. And they trample this holy city in various ways, different heads and different horns. Then we look at Daniel chapter 9, and we see that there is this 490 years cut off from it, from the 7 times. Now let's take a look at Daniel chapter 8, because Seventh-day Adventists have said to try to understand when this is all going to happen. They somehow ignore the 7 times in Daniel 4 as the entire time for the Gentiles to trample. They ignore it. That's what it says. There will be 7 times. You'll be like a beast. See, the Gentile kingdoms. But they then turn to Daniel chapter 8, where it talks about 2,300 evenings and mornings. And then they turn that into years, which there's no basis for, as we said, because it specifically says in Daniel chapter 8 that the 2,300 evenings and mornings has something to do with that time period of the 1,260 days. Daniel 12 says 1,335 days. I mean, there's different days. But those days all have to do with specific days that will run at the very end of the times. And none of that has happened yet. And so in Daniel chapter 8, he tells them about these 300 or 2,300 days. Not a day for a year. And Daniel's like, well, when will this be? And then it says that Daniel fell sick many days. Look at what it says in Daniel chapter 8, verse 27. And I, Daniel, fainted and was sick certain days. Afterward, I rose up and did the king's business, and I was astonished at the vision, but none understood it. What is the vision? Well, he's seeing aspects of it in various visions. But this Daniel chapter 8 is specifically talking about, Daniel says, I saw in the vision, I sought for the meaning, beheld there stood before me as the appearance of a man, and I heard a man's voice between the banks of Ulai, which called and said to Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. Well, remember in Daniel chapter 9 where it says these 490 years are cut off. He says, I saw Gabriel that I saw at the start of the vision. And he came to make it known unto me. Well, why would Gabriel come back again to make it known? Well, we just read because at the start of the vision in Daniel chapter 8, the Gabriel, right? Remember who he says, the man Gabriel came unto me, who came to me at the start, who was going to make known the vision, but he never did. Why? Because Daniel fell sick many days. So Daniel got part of the vision, but he didn't get the understanding. That's why he says, Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. But he doesn't ever tell him in Daniel 8 the meaning. He doesn't tell him the meaning until the next chapter, Daniel 9. And he says, the man at the beginning who came to me said, I was going to give you the answer, but you fell sick and now I've come back. And we'll see that here in a second. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was afraid, and I fell upon my face. But he said unto me, understand, O son of man, for at the time of the end shall the vision be. Okay? Not at the end of 2,300 evenings and mornings, or days. Not at the end of 1,260 days. No. That's specific days that we're told when the time comes that we'll know. Right? That last tribulation. That's why Jesus said if those days hadn't been cut short, no flesh would be saved. That's that last tribulation. But how do we know when that tribulation begins? Well, he was going to tell him the meaning of this vision. But he says, make Daniel understand. And it says, now he was speaking with me, and I was in deep sleep upon my face toward the ground. But he touched me, and he set me upright. And he said, behold, I will make thee know what shall be in the last end of the indignation. For at the time appointed shall the end be. The ram which you saw, having two horns, are the kings of Media and Persia. And he goes then in to describe various kingdoms down from Daniel's time, going through Greece, Media, Persia, Rome, and all the way down to the last days. And if you get to looking in there, Daniel describes all the kingdoms, even Rome, all the way down to our day, when the last 10 horns of the one world government is set up. And there's no way that any of that happened in 70 AD. You see? And so it says in verse 23, and at the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up. This is the Antichrist. But nobody knows when he's coming. And in the days of Jesus, they asked, when is this all going to happen? And Paul's like, hey, the man of sin's got to be revealed. And it won't come, right? Gathering together unto Jesus until the man of sin is revealed. I used to tell you this. He exalts himself above all that is called God. We're all looking forward to this one world government, the Antichrist, the last 10 horns, because here in Daniel chapter 8, this is what the Advent movement got all caught up on. And then even Jehovah's Witnesses started off from this viewpoint, and then they sort of changed it in 1914. But they read here in Daniel 8, chapter 13, then I heard a holy one speaking, and another one said to that certain one who was speaking, how long will the vision be concerning the daily sacrifices and the transgression of desolation, the giving of both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot? And he said unto me, for 2,300 days, then the sanctuary will be cleansed. Okay, so they assumed that it meant that from the going forth of the call to restore and to rebuild Jerusalem be 2,300 years, day for a year. And then the sanctuary would be cleansed. But that's not what it says. This particular 2,300 evenings and mornings is specifically referring to the same kind of period, because there's 3 different or 4 different days that Daniel gives. He gives 1,260 days, 1,290 days, 1,335 days, and 2,300 evenings and mornings. Whatever that means. But all of these have to do with the tribulation period, and from the time that you see the daily sacrifice taken and the Antichrist rises and this and that and everything until the very end. But it's not talking about how long it would be until the tribulation comes after Christ and the whole kit and caboodle, the whole period. That is described in Daniel 4 as 7 times. This little period of 2,300 days is the last little bit at the tribulation, where we're going to need to know the exact number of the days, because it'll be so terrible. People will be dying and will be scared, and we need to know the Lord has cut it short. There's a specific number of days. So Seventh-day Adventists made the mistake to just assume that the 2,300 evenings and mornings, or 2,300 days, where we translate that, you could somehow make those days for years and count it from that date that we had already said when the call went forth to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. And then you'd count 2,300 years, and it would come to 1844. Well, that didn't pan out. The world didn't come to an end in 2000 or 1844. Jesus didn't return or nothing. So this is where the Jehovah's Witnesses came in. They were following this line of reasoning, and it didn't happen in 1844. So then they made up a new date, 1864, and then date after date after date. And then they decided, they got to reading it, and they found out about these 7 times. Jehovah's Witnesses, crazy. They almost had it right, And they said, well, the 7 times end in 1914. Well, that's because they started it in 607 BC, which not one secular historian says is the right date to start it. And they started with some destruction of Jerusalem or something. They just make it up. It's really odd that they could have been that ignorant. Then they were that close. That close. Somehow they couldn't figure out it starts from the going forth of the call to restore and build Jerusalem. That the 490 years were cut off from that. Because those were years upon thy people. But then it would continue to be lying desolate until the consummation. And this is why Jesus, again, I keep saying this, says, Jerusalem shall be trampled on by the Gentiles until the Gentile times are over. So all we have to know is, when does the Gentile time start, which we now know is about 450 BC. 490 years is upon thy people, and then Jerusalem's destroyed. But that's not the end, because then they're taken captive into all the nations, and Jerusalem is trampled until the whole 7 times is then over, which would be 2,520 years. Now, you can do the math, 2,520 years, you cut off the 450 or whatever years it was, and that comes out that the 490 year comes out about the time of Jesus and his crucifixion. But we're still waiting for the last 3.5 years. Now, how do we know when that runs? When the Gentile times are over, the 7 times. And that starts at the same time that the 490 years starts. So we go on down, and he describes a lot of this in verse 27 again. And Daniel fainted and was sick, and certain days afterward I rose up and did the king's business, and I was astonished at the vision, but none understood it. So then we go to Daniel 9, and he starts in, and he says, in verse 20, and while I was speaking and praying and confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my supplication before the Lord, my El, for the holy mountain of my deity, whilst I was speaking in prayer, even the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision at the beginning, being caused to fly swiftly, touched me about the time of the evening oblation. So that's what we just read in Daniel 8, where Gabriel came to make known the vision, but he couldn't because he fell sick. So now he comes back. The man Gabriel comes back about the time of the evening oblation, and he informed me and talked with me, and he said, "O Daniel, I am now come forth to give thee understanding." Remember, he said that in chapter 8, I'm going to come give you understanding. But Daniel fell sick many days. So now he's come back, and he touches him. And at the beginning of the supplications, the commandment came forth, and I am come to show thee. What is that commandment that came forth? Well, it was this last tribulation. The abomination of desolation, the Antichrist, and the 2,300 evenings and mornings, and elsewhere it specifically broke down 1,260, 1,335. So there's all these particular dates that we'll only understand. They're literal days, but we'll only understand when the time comes, when the tribulation comes. That's when we're really going to need to know exactly how long we have left. Because if you're in a tribulation and you're being persecuted, you want to know, okay, is this going to last forever? No, because the angel swore with his right hand, it will be a times and a half a time, and then these things will be finished. All right, so what we're not doing here is trying to figure out how long the 1,260 days or the 2,300 evenings and mornings are. Daniel was already told that. They're days. Specific literal days. What we're trying to determine is, when will this happen? The end of the indignation, right? I know he tells him, consider the vision. Behold, therefore, and understand the matter, and consider the vision. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city. And then he goes through all of this, like we said. And he tells us, verse 25, know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to rebuild Jerusalem under the Messiah, the Prince. So he tells you the beginning date of these 490 years that are cut off from the entire 7 times. And we know that the 7 times are the Gentile times because it says that the Gentile bestial kingdoms trample the city 7 times. It tells us that in Daniel chapter 4. Let me show you that. All right, look at, starting with verse 13. I saw in the vision of my head while on my bed, and there was a watcher, a holy one coming down from heaven. He cried aloud and said thus, chop down the tree, cut off its branches, strip its leaves, and scatter its fruit, and let the beasts get out from under it, and the birds from its branches. Nevertheless, leave the stump and the roots of the earth, bound with band of iron and bronze. In the tender grass of the field, let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let him graze with the beasts of the grass of the earth, and let his heart be changed from that of a man, and let him be given the heart of a beast, and let 7 times pass over him. This decision is by the decree of the watchers, and the sentence by the word of the holy ones, in order that the living may know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men, gives it to whomever he wills, and sets over it the lowliest of men. So there is the entire period that the bestial Gentile kingdoms would reign until it's all done away and Christ sets up his kingdom. But in conclusion, let me read Luke 21, verse 20 down through 24 again. And keep in mind everything we read there in the book of Daniel. When you see, Jesus says, Jerusalem surrounded by armies, that happened in 66 AD to 70. Know that its desolation is near. Okay, is that the end of the world? No. Then let those who are in Judea flee into the mountains. Let those who are in the midst of her depart, and let not those who are in the country enter her. For these are the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. All things. We read what was written, specifically in Daniel, because this is what Jesus keeps taking us back to. And what needed to be fulfilled is the 7 times that the Gentiles would trample the holy city. So it says, woe to those who are pregnant. There'll be great distress, wrath upon this people for 3.5 years only, no. And they will fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive into all the nations. And Jerusalem will be trampled on by the Gentiles, the beast kingdoms that Daniel spoke of, with different heads and horns that come up from in various times of history, all the way down to the 2 iron legs and the 10 toes and the last one world government, all the way to the end of the world. And Jerusalem will be trampled by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. Friends, if you live in Jerusalem, get out, and get out now. And don't look back. Anyway, guys, I'm going to go ahead and go. I hope that helped and explained, more about why it's been 2,000 years and what's really going on and what Jesus meant in Matthew 24 and Luke 21. And so, may the Lord bless you. Have a great evening. Share this for those that you think would need to hear this. A lot of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses need to hear this, and Adventists and other people. Everybody really needs to hear this. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a good one.